For 100 years, one name has been synonymous with magic, family, and fairy tales. Disney. An empire built on beloved characters and the promise of a happily ever after. But in 1985, that empire was on the brink of collapse because it had created a monster. A film so dark, so terrifying, it was unlike anything the studio had ever made. This is the story of the film that was brutally butchered by its own studio, became a catastrophic failure at the box office, and almost erased Walt Disney Animation from existence for good. To understand how Disney, the king of fairy tales, ended up making a horror film, we have to go back to the 1970s. After the death of its founder, Walt Disney, in 1966, the legendary animation studio had lost its way. Their films, while charming, lacked the groundbreaking ambition of the Golden Age. Creatively, the magic felt like it was fading. The crisis concluded in 1979. Convinced the studio was creatively bankrupt, the star animator Don Bluth and more than a dozen of his colleagues dramatically resigned to form their own rival studio. It was a devastating blow that left Disney Animation on the brink of collapse. But a new, hungry generation of young animators saw this crisis as an opportunity, a chance to break from the past and redefine what a Disney movie could be. They wanted to create something epic, mature, and dark, to compete with the new wave of fantasy films that were captivating audiences. They found their answer in a series of fantasy novels called The Chronicles of Prydain, a gritty, high fantasy saga that was a world away from singing mice and fairy godmothers. This would be their masterpiece. This would be the film that made Disney cool again. The world they began to build was unlike any seen before in a Disney film. The concept art, some of which was drawn by a young and still unknown Tim Burton, was moody, atmospheric, and a world away from the bright pastels of a classic fairy tale.
And at the heart of this dark world was a villain, designed to be genuinely terrifying, the Horned King. With his skeletal design and chilling voice, he wasn't meant to be funny or charming. He was the stuff of nightmares. To bring this vision to life, the animators pushed the boundaries of technology. The Black Cauldron became one of the first Disney films to incorporate computer-generated imagery, using early CGI to animate the mystical cauldron itself. The film's ambition was also clear in its sheer scale. It was the first Disney animated feature to be shot in 70mm widescreen in almost 30 years. But this grand vision came at a staggering price. With a troubled, decade-long production, the budget ballooned to over $44 million, making it the most expensive animated film ever made at the time. For Disney, everything was on the line. After 12 years of grueling development and a turbulent production, the most expensive animated film in history was finally complete. For the young animators who had poured their careers into the project, it was a moment of triumph. They had broken the old Disney mold and created the dark, mature epic they had always dreamed of. They believed they had a masterpiece on their hands. The studio held its breath. This was their $44 million gamble, the film that was supposed to save Disney Animation and redefine it for a new generation. All that was left was to show it to an audience. A test screening was arranged for a group of families in the studio's private theater. It was a screening that would go down in Disney history as a complete and utter disaster. The lights in the Disney theater dimmed. In the audience were the animators, holding their breath for the reaction to their masterpiece. Also in the audience were the brand new heads of the studio, Michael Eisner and Jeffrey Katzenberg. This was one of the first major projects they had inherited. As the film reached its terrifying climax, the reaction from the audience was not awe, it was panic. Young children began to cry uncontrollably. According to eyewitnesses, some were so frightened that their parents had to grab them and run out of the theater in the middle of the screening. The test was a complete catastrophe. For Jeffrey Katzenberg, the famously intense and demanding new chairman of Walt Disney Studios, this was an absolute betrayal of the brand. He saw the film not as a bold new direction, but as a grotesque, unmarketable horror movie for children. A $44 million disaster that could poison the Disney name. The story goes that as soon as the lights came up, A furious Katzenberg confronted the film's producer. The movie, he declared, was unreleasable as it was. The most terrifying scenes had to be cut.
What followed was one of the most infamous moments in the history of Disney Animation. When the film's producers resisted making the deep cuts Katzenberg demanded, an enraged chairman reportedly took the reels of the film, walked into an edit bay himself, and began ordering cuts frame by frame. 12 minutes of painstakingly animated footage, representing years of work from dozens of artists, was butchered from the final film. The animation team was devastated. Their dark masterpiece had been mutilated, and many felt the story no longer made sense. The version of The Black Cauldron that was released in July 1985 was a compromised, disjointed shadow of their original vision. The result was a catastrophe. The film was a massive box office bomb, grossing just $21 million on its record-breaking budget. In a final, crushing humiliation for the once mighty studio, it was even beaten at the box office by the Care Bears movie. The failure was so absolute that it threatened the very existence of the department Walt Disney had built. Morale was destroyed. The animation studio was on the verge of being shut down for good. The dream of a new, darker Disney had been officially, brutally unmade. At the end of 1985, Disney Animation was a ghost. The studio was nearly shuttered. Its artists demoralized, its future in doubt. The dark epic had failed. But this catastrophic failure forced a painful but necessary reevaluation. The new leadership realized that in their attempt to be dark and cool, they had abandoned the very things that made Disney magical: heartfelt stories, timeless characters, and the power of music. They went back to basics. They structured their next film not like a grim fantasy, but like a Broadway musical. They hired 2 genius songwriters, and in 1989, they released The Little Mermaid. It was vibrant, joyful, and a masterpiece of musical storytelling. Everything The Black Cauldron was not. It was a colossal success that kicked off the Disney Renaissance, the most successful and beloved era in the studio's history. It was a rebirth that gave us Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King, and saved the company. And that is the final incredible lesson of this story. The failure of The Black Cauldron wasn't the end of Disney Animation. It was the violent, necessary unmaking that cleared the way for its spectacular rebirth. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes the greatest successes are built directly on the ashes of our most spectacular failures.